Yes, sir. Mr. Chairman, members of the board, thank you for having us back. My name is Mitch Bergoglio with Davenport. Y'all know Bob High. He's my colleague with me. A couple weeks ago, Ted Cole and I were here, and we presented a couple presentations to you, and y'all gave us some feedback and asked us to come back with some additional numbers on just the school project information we discussed. So that's the information we have for you here today. At the last meeting, we discussed 5 school projects that y'all would like to look at. We had the 3 renovation projects. These project cost estimates are from the schools. The central attendance at $1.8 million, Spring Creek Elementary at $3.85 million, and Charles B. Aycock at $6.6 million, for a total of $12.3 million of school renovation projects. Those are the 3 projects that y'all have been looking at. Secondly, you asked us to look at the construction of 2 new schools, total of $30 million, so $15 million per school. No assumptions have been made about what goes into those schools, whether they're high performance, non-high performance, what's involved in the construction of the schools, classrooms, etc. Just a flat $30 million for 2 schools, $15 million per school. So we also looked at the reserves the school had and estimated the balance of those reserves as of June 30th of 2014. There's several funds that the schools have set aside to pay for capital and debt service: the sales tax capital reserve fund, the school capital project fund, the school capital maintenance fund, the QSCAB project fund, and the lottery fund balance. The first 4 of those funds are held at the county and school level. The lottery funds are held at the state level. The total of the 4 funds held at the county school level was $16.2 million, and when you add the lottery to it, there's a total of $22.7 million the schools have available to pay for capital and debt service. So with the project costs and understanding those reserves that were on hand, what we were asked to look at is funding the 3 renovation projects with school capital and debt service reserves. So in the chart on the top right corner, this is the sources and uses for the renovation projects. We've assumed that the $12.3 million of renovation projects would be funded first with $6.5 million of lottery funds. That's the balance as of January 24th, according to the school clearinghouse. That's our best estimate at this point in time of where they'll be at June 30th, 2014. So we've pulled down all of those lottery funds available. Those are held at the state, and there's some discussion about how long those funds will be available. So the idea is to grab those all as soon as we can. The remainder of the $12.3 million is assumed to be funded with other school capital reserves from those 4 accounts we discussed on the prior page. That would leave the balance of the remainder of school capital reserves at $10.4 million. So we would be using $12.3 million. That would leave $10.4 million. The new school construction is assumed in this case to be funded with limited obligation bonds. The direction was to look at a debt financing for that $30 million. We've assumed a limited obligation bond issue in this case. We've assumed that would close sometime this summer, and we've assumed current market interest rates as of today. Those current market interest rates resulted in an all-in interest cost of 3.94%. So right at that 4% level that we had been talking about for an installment limited obligation certificate of participation last go around. You can see in the bottom right, this is the sources and uses for the debt issuance. We're funding $15 million for each school. We've got an assumption in there for cost of issuance. There would be fixed costs and variable costs associated with a limited obligation bond issue, and we've made an allowance for those. You can see up top under sources of funds, the par amount is $28.1 million. That's because of the interest rate environment we're in. Investors are willing to pay a premium for bonds, and you will have to pay a higher coupon for that premium. But when you factor all that in, they're willing to pay you more than $1 they're willing to pay you more than 100 pennies on the dollar for your bonds, which results in you having more money to fund the projects and having to pay back less debt. The total debt, I know that's a lot. I just didn't want you to be confused by why we're only issuing $28.1 million of bonds. We're still funding $30 million of projects. You will pay back all the debt service on that. You will just end up paying less principal and more interest due to the bond pricing. So,
Mr. Chairman, can I ask a question?
Mr. Doherty.
I hate to interrupt your flow.
no, please.
But if I'm understanding you correctly, that our obligation would be 28.1, but we actually are receiving a little over 30 million.
Yes, sir. You would receive $30.3 million in proceeds to fund the $30 million of projects and the cost of issuance for your bond issue. And the par amount you would issue would be $28 million, $28.1 million. That would be the principal amount of the bonds that you would have to repay.
Okay.
We'll get in, on the next page, we'll talk about the total payback, including interest. Okay, so $28.1 million to fund the $30.3 million of projects. On the next page, we look at the total payback. So we've got the chart, principal, interest, and total debt service. So you can see in the aggregate, $28.1 million. That's the principal we talked about from the prior page. You're paying interest of $14.48 million for a total debt service payback of $42.5 million. Associated with the new schools is also, there will be additional operating costs as well. We reached out to Wayne County Schools, and they gave us an estimate of $850,000 per school. That would be all in with staffing and energy and all other costs. So we've assumed in the first year of operations, FY16, we've assumed $1.7 million, and we've grown that at 1.5% per year. So if you look on an annual basis, the first year you would pay principal and interest and begin operations of the school, you would pay $2.6 million of principal and interest, another $1.7 million of operating costs, for a total of $4.3 million. Stop there and ask you if you have any questions on this page.
Sure.
Mr. Doherty.
Why, I'm in the housing business, and I'm used to a level payment.
Yes, sir.
Here, you're not going to have a level payment.
That's right, and thank you for bringing that up. We've assumed these bonds would be issued at 20-year level principal. So that's every year you're paying back the same principal amount. That is what the local government commission likes to see. That is what they recommend. Recently, they've put out a set of draft policies that are being reviewed and will ultimately be adopted by the local government commission in the coming months. Those policies suggest that for governmental projects, they want to see 20-year level principal. They will come off of that in very certain instances where the locality needs to come off of that level principal, but their policy is to do 20-year level principal on a general government financing. So that's what we've showed in this case. This is what they would like to see. There could be some discussion with the local government commission if we could structure it in a different manner, but this is the traditional structure that you're going to see from a general government financing around the state. And Bob?
Might mention rating agents.
Yeah, and the rating agencies also like to see this level principal structure. It produces a faster amortization of your debt, so it's a credit strength to be paying down your debt more quickly. With a level payment structure, like we would see in the mortgage business or in the housing industry, you've got two components that you're paying to get to that level payment, paying principal and interest. In the earlier years, because you have more principal outstanding, you're paying more interest and less principal. And over time, that ratio changes. So the more quickly you amortize your debt, the more quickly you repay principal, the more of a credit strength that is. And that's one of the reasons why the LGC prefers level principal.
I say, though, if you're used to the home mortgage,
Step up to the microphone, please.
if you're used to home mortgages, the reason there's a difference, I think generally people consider the home mortgages being an individual's largest purchase, and they're probably not going to buy another house without selling the one they're in. With governmental units, we're looking at that need. You're going to need more schools. You're going to need jails. You're going to need things. So it opens up your debt capacity. You regain debt capacity, the ability to meet future needs faster when you do a level principal. And again, the rating agencies normally, and I think we provided you all with documents that reflected what the normal payback, 10-year payback is on taxable debt, and it's normally 60 to 70% of most government's debt's paid back within 10 years, the principal.
Could I follow up?
Yes, sir. Mr.
So
Carter.
if I'm understanding, basically, this is what's recommended in regards to financing versus a level payment.
This is what the local government commission, and Bob, you feel free to jump in. This is what the local government commission will start with. This is what they will say they would like to see. This is their recommendation, and this is how most financings occur. General government financings occur around the state.
Yeah, and they've just written that policy and had it out for discussion and all, so, and that's coming not necessarily from the staff of the commission, but from the local government commission.
And there are
itself.
instances where you can come off of this level principal structure. It requires conversations with the LGC, meetings, and discussing with them why it's important to come off of it. And ultimately, the question is whether you can get them comfortable with that or not.
Well, I don't want to get too far ahead of myself here, but I generally do. I was comparing based upon the overall payment affordability. And if on one hand, we're looking at a lease that has level payments at 3.4, and we're comparing it with a principal first payment type method that's not level payment, it kind of skews the results a little bit in my mind.
Yeah, and Mitch, I think before the analysis we had done for you, they were both done on the same basis.
Right.
Now, this one, there is no comparison as such because that isn't what we were asked to do at the time.
Agreed.
This is just looking at $30 million of new schools, flat $30 million, financed with a limited obligation bond, and we've amortized it how the local government commission would generally like to see it. We can certainly look at it a different way if you'd like us to, but ultimately we feel comfortable that we can get this principal structure. This principal structure is not going to cause any problems, not going to have any issues at the local government commission. So we felt comfortable with this. That's what we've assumed. Certainly, there could be other structures that we can talk about, and that would just require conversations with them. Yes, sir.
When you say other structures, specifically, what are you talking about? Are you talking about a different dollar amount? Or what are you?
Well, excuse me, when I say other structures, I was referring to other principal repayment structures. So we've got level principal here, meaning if you've got a 20-year bond issue for $20 million, you're going to pay back $1 million every year. If you look on page 4, in the principal column, you can see we're paying back the same amount, $1.41 million every year. That's a level principal amortization structure.
On $30 million.
Yes, sir. On approximately $30 million. So on page 4, you've got 6 columns. The first column is fiscal year, when your payments are beginning. This second column is your principal repayment. So we talked about there's $28.1 million of principal being issued to fund these projects. Begin paying principal in fiscal year 2016, and you repay $1.41 million. You repay that same 1.41 or 1.405 million every year from 2016 to 2035. The interest calculation is based on that level principal repayment. So you can see over time, your interest payment is highest in fiscal year 16 at 1.2 million and comes down over time as you're repaying the principal. So your total debt service, the fourth column over, your total debt service, that's your total payment, is highest in the first year you repay principal at $2.6 million, and it's reduced every year as your interest payment is reduced.
So for this discussion, I heard a 3.2, but I think that was being read from Mr. Daugherty. Where was that?
That was the lease payment.
What, the school system?
Yeah, the presentation they had Friday.
Right. And I was just wanting to clear it up in my head and for the public. When you're looking at what you're paying back off of what you just described, it would naturally be different because there are more things in the package that the school system discussed the other day. So for the public, I'm not sure you're comparing apples and oranges, but you might be comparing the big yellow apple to that red one. I just want to grab something that I can hang on to, if that's fair. So I think I followed the 30 million, but 3.2 that you, Mr. Daugherty referenced, had more stuff in that you would have to finance over time. So consequently, the total debt service would be different. And okay, I just want
Yes, sir, absolutely.
That's why I want to be clear when there are terms we use that may not just make it plain to us, and certainly the public that's out there listening to this. Okay, go ahead.
Yes, sir. No, I understand completely. So please stop me
That's fine. That's fine.
all the time, and I'm happy to dig into it deeper. But this go ahead.
Yeah, let me make one quick comment. This presentation is responding to a request from the board prior to any knowledge of this information. We can compare and do a different analysis, whatever you want, on any basis you want us to do it. But this was not done with any knowledge or information and not meant to be
And that's what I wanted the
prepared.
public to understand, is the public maybe sitting here listening, but certainly the
Yep.
public that will be watching this on television, understand we're not talking about the same bag of goodies in
Correct.
there. We're talking about different ones. All right.
Absolutely.
Any other questions on this page, the principal, interest, total debt service, or the operating costs that we've assumed?
Question.
Ooh,
Mr. Lloyd.
yeah, since you brought up operating costs, I was gonna pass on that, but I do have a question on operating costs. And I think we all need to be cognizant of the fact that it's not only the payment, either by lease or payment on the actual indebtedness, but it's also additional costs to the county taxpayers, the ad valorem tax, to actually increase payment for operating costs. Because I have not heard from the school board that the school board is interested in absorbing those costs. And with that in mind, that makes things a little bit more difficult, because you're looking at a $1.7 million in cost, and I understood you to say that was to include utilities.
Yes, sir. It's our understanding that we got this information from the schools, and it's our understanding that that's sort of the all-in county cost of operating a school would be $850,000. Like I said, the projects that we assumed, just a generic $15 million, made no assumptions about high performance, non-high performance. So from our perspective, the most conservative thing to do was just to try and capture the all-in cost of a school and go from there.
Was the 850 broken down?
No, sir.
It was not.
No, sir.
So we don't know whether or not there's $200,000 worth of electricity in that 850.
No, sir.
The email that came to
Ma'am,
me
come
wanted
up,
to-
come up.
I'm sorry, I think we need to know this, though.
I got an email on one snowy night, wanted a total general idea of what the operating cost would be, assuming non-high-performance schools, which included the electrical cost, of which I estimated around $850,000. I was not asked to be broken out, but I can tell you I was estimating about 165 to 170,000 in electrical cost in that. The rest was personnel.
About 170,000 in
Yes,
electric
sir.
costs
Per school,
per school.
yes,
So if we went with the recommendation of the school board, we would not have that cost.
absolutely.
Are there any other costs that could be reduced off that 850?
My number is worst-case scenario, because as a school system, from year to year, I don't know what my state funding is going to be. I can assume today, which as I move forward into next year's budget, that my state funding is going to remain the same. But you know as well as I do, until the General Assembly hammers down, that's when I find out what my state funding is going to be. Could we absorb some things? We might can. I can't sit here and guarantee you, yes, sir, I can. So I'm giving you worst-case scenario. That's the best I can do today. I don't want to go on record saying, yes, sir, I can handle every bit of those personnel costs, because I don't know that I can.
I understand. And for those listening, could you state your position?
I'm Nancy Barwick with Wayne County Schools, and I'm the Assistant Superintendent for Fiscal Services. All the money, all the business.
Goes through you.
It's mine.
So you are employed with the school system?
Yes, sir.
Okay,
All right.
just want to make sure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Barwick.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
So we've taken the information here on page 4, the debt service and the projected operating costs, and we've dropped it into analysis, which is something similar to what y'all have seen in the past from us. And again, apologize for the small font here, so we may need to look at it on the piece of paper. But this is trying to identify the debt service and capital requirements, in this case, of just the schools, debt service and capital requirements, the restricted revenues that are available to pay for debt service and capital requirements, and see what the impact is on the annual cash flow. So I'll walk you through here from left to right in each of the columns. We've done this on a fiscal year basis in column A. Column B is where we've layered in the existing debt service for just the schools. This does not include any county debt service. This is just schools. Column B is the existing debt, and that's the qualified school construction bond that y'all issued. Column C is the CIP debt service. That's the debt service associated with the 2 schools funded at $30 million. That's a total of $42.5 million, which is directly from the prior page that we walked through. Column D and E are just empty placeholders. Column F is the school pay-as-you-go capital. So in 2015, this includes the $12.3 million of renovation projects, the 3 renovation projects that we discussed earlier, plus the annual pay-go maintenance and capital that the schools invest. That's all totaled up in column H. So B, C, and F are totaled up in column H. The first year you can see it's $16.3 million of requirements, because again, it includes the $12.3 million of renovation projects. Columns I through M are identifying the revenues available to pay for those requirements. We've got 2 revenues identified here. These are restricted revenues available to pay for school capital and debt service. Column J is the restricted sales tax, approximately $3.99 million per year. Column K is the lottery dedicated to debt service and capital. We've got that in here at $1,071,000. That's a direct offset of column B, which is equal to the qualified school construction bond debt service. Now, I can tell you that in fiscal 13, that lottery money came in slightly higher, around $1.3 million. For purposes of conservatism, we've assumed the $1.07 million as a direct offset to the qualified school construction bonds. So we've got the total of all of those revenues available in column M, that's $5 million. And in column N, we compare the the capital and debt service requirements in column H to the revenues available in column M. So for fiscal 15, you can see there's $16.3 million of requirements, $5 million of revenues for a deficit of $11.3 million. Now, we know that number is to fund the school renovation project. So jump over to column S with me for a second. Column S is the fund balance available to pay for debt service and capital. That's the $22.7 million number we discussed earlier. That's between the funds that are set aside at the school and county level, as well as the lottery funds set aside at the state level. So in fiscal 15, we're using $11.2 million of those reserves, and we're pulling it down to $11.4 million. Column O is doing math from any tax adjustments that are produced from this. Column P is the use of those school capital reserves over time. You can see we're using the capital reserves through 2025 until they are exhausted. And when I say they're exhausted, we've brought them down to $4 million. We understand that the schools would like to maintain a minimum of $4 million in those capital reserve funds. So we've set that as the minimum amount we could draw down the fund balance to. Column R is the estimated tax equivalent, your revenue, the shortfall or your revenue requirement that you would have to come up with to cover any surplus or deficit. That's column R. That's only for capital. So here we're talking about existing debt service on the 2 new schools, and the restricted revenues available to pay for those debt service, as well as pay-as-you-go capital. So this is only debt service and only capital. Column R represents the estimated incremental tax equivalent.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
Real quickly, just so I won't lose track, the $4 million that you're drawing down to in 2025, you said that was $4 million set aside. I know you're drawing down to that $4 million, but is that plugged in to 2014-15? Is that part of the thinking, is to take the $4 million and restrict it as the first year coming out of the gate?
I think it was a couple meetings ago where I think may have been the joint meeting between the county and the school board. The comment was made that that school reserves could be used, but wanted to maintain a minimum fund balance in those reserves of $4 million. So that's where we got that assumption from, that we would not draw it down below $4 million. That $4 million is not assumed to be used. It's the minimum amount that they would have in the bank at any given time.
Okay, my question, I guess, to look into the future is that if we do go through with the plan, that $4 million possibly, if it is restricted, that it's indicated so coming out of the gate, $4 million in 2015-16, in case it all goes south and we have to use it. So I would like to know of the restricted pattern that the school board would use on that $4 million. Would it be restricted to save, or could it be used to pay some of these other items?
In general, it's my understanding that it's restricted for debt service and capital. These funds that are coming in are naturally restricted for only debt service and only school capital.
Okay, got it.
So as that
Not
fund balance
operating.
builds up over time, you can use it to pay for capital or debt service.
But not operating?
That's correct. That's my
Okay.
understanding.
Okay, right. Thank you. I got it.
So column R is your revenue requirement, and we've stated it in terms of an incremental tax rate equivalent. And out in 2025, you've exhausted the school reserves. You've brought them down to the minimum of $4 million, and there's a shortfall of $213,000. That's the equivalent of about 0.25 pennies, so a quarter of a penny out in 2025.
I mean, on the ad valorem.
On the ad valorem tax, yes, sir. It's stated as an equivalent ad valorem tax rate. It's 213,000, which out in 2025 is projected to be about a quarter of a penny. The following year, assuming that that quarter of a penny revenue comes in every year after it's realized, we're short an additional $550,000. That's the equivalent of about 0.65 pennies. So in the aggregate, it would be a 0.92 penny tax equivalent. But what I can tell you is after 2025 and 2026, those are the only 2 years that show a deficit in this analysis. After that, it's back in the positive. So we've calculated how much will be required to meet those projected deficits without a tax rate equivalent, and that would be about $1.3 million. So the further use of $1.3 million of reserves would directly offset the need for any tax equivalent in this analysis. That's the capital side. We're only talking about capital. So the incremental revenue requirements for capital is $1.3 million of reserves, or out in 2025 and 2026, a tax equivalent of 0.92 pennies. Column T is where we've layered in the estimated incremental operating costs. So as we talked about on the prior page, we're assuming $1.7 million for the 2 schools, total operating costs. Starting in fiscal year 2016, that would be the equivalent of about 2.25 pennies based on the value of the real estate tax, ad valorem tax. So the 1.7 pennies in operating equates to about 2.2 pennies, and assuming those operating costs grow at 1.5% per year, there would be a slight increase there. In the aggregate, between the amounts required for capital out in 2025 and 2026 and the amounts required for operations, it would be a total of about 3.4 pennies over the life of this project, 2015 to 2035. If you are able to further use reserves to help cover the capital, that 0.92 pennies could be avoided, and you would be left with just the operations there of 2.24 pennies in fiscal 16 and about 2.5 pennies over the life of this project from 2015 to 2035. And I've been talking for a while, and that was a lot of information, so.
Assuming that the lottery funds as projected here stay the same, and assuming as the sales tax receipts stay the same.
Yes, sir.
All that's assuming on the revenue side.
Yes, sir. This analysis assumes that you have those 2 forms of restricted revenues that come in every year, lottery and sales tax. I think it's Article 40 and 42 sales tax. So if anything were to change with those revenues, obviously this analysis would change.
Have you, as an overview, to follow up, Mr. Chairman, as an overview, as Davenport has looked at this for a good gracious 7 or 8 months now, and I appreciate all the work that you guys done, but it's interesting that the way that the lottery funds, in particular the formula that was adjusted in September of last year in the General Assembly, moving from a 50, 40, 10 formula, is that the 40% now is being talked about in the General Assembly, particularly in the short session, and possibly into the coming year, is that the 40%, as I spoke to Representative Leo Daughtry last night, Mr. Payton and I did, and in reference to the lottery funds in Johnston County, that 40% may be moved down to somewhere in the neighborhood of 25 to 30% adjusted to make room for IT in the educational arena. So, you know, Johnston County prepared for a $4.5 million annual payment from the lottery and ended up this past year with $2.3 million. And, you know, they're in the association, of course, as you know, the North Carolina Association of County Commissioners took this and championed this last year to hold on to that 40%, to make sure that 40% stayed as is. So I was just curious that you had projected lottery funds And of course, the lottery proceeds that we have in the last 5 years have gone from 2.4 million down to 1.3 million just in 5 years. So I guess with all of that, I was thinking it's, instead of giving a 20%, be more realistic and probably give us instead of a 20-year, be more realistic and giving us something like a 5-year plan, and to look at just 5 years and what is real and probably anticipated.
In terms of
Well,
just the lottery or
In terms
combined?
of revenue, and where we would be as a commission, as far as revenue, I'm just concerned about sustainability and the revenue source.
Okay. So, and we could certainly run that case if you wanted to look at what does this plan look like if Article 4042, restricted sales tax and lottery go away after 5 years, what would that?
Sure.
What sort of equivalent tax rate would that be?
And only because that we've assumed this, and you're working on the property tax or ad valorem tax, where, I'm concerned as a commissioner is that, when do we raise the property tax?
Yes, sir.
To take care of the losses, that speculative for sure on the lottery side and sales tax. But then again, sales tax could be raised also. But if retail sales aren't there, no good to raise sales tax. The retail sales aren't there. So, and I was just interested in when you're starting to talk about property taxes. And maybe not go out 20 years, but give us more of a 5-year look.
Okay. Happy to run that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Here's my skepticism. The numbers don't add up. And let me tell you why I say that. It's great how you've gone through this, and anything I say that's incorrect, please correct me. Pam, if you'll kind of chime in on this as well, but let me break this down rather simple the way I computed this. The schools have an income coming from sales tax of roughly $4 million a year. Is that correct? Their portion of the sales tax, $4 million a year. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. That's what we've assumed,
All right.
3.99.
The next thing we have coming in are lotteries. Lottery proceeds are $1.3 million a year. Is that correct?
Correct, that's on the school, that's on the school side.
That's right, on the school side. So if I add those together, I've got how much per year coming in? That's $5.3 million.
Correct.
The current obligations would be $1,071,000. I'm gonna round that off to $1 million on a payment on an existing outstanding loan. Would y'all call that CCABs? Or? Okay. So now we don't have 4.3 million. I'm sorry. We don't have 5.3. We now have 4.3. Is that correct?
Correct.
Now let me reduce it one more time, and that is what you are analyzing and stating $1.99, $2 million a year that goes to their
Capital outlay maintenance.
capital outlay maintenance. Now, I have to take that away as well. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. You have to, that's,
You
in
have to
this
back that
analysis,
away.
we've assumed.
Now, how much
that
money have I got left on an annualized basis?
Around $3.2 million.
How much?
Around 3.2.
Well, your addition is different than mine.
Or did I, 2.2? Did I do that math
2.3.
wrong?
Okay.
Yeah, 5.2,
I got 5.2, and I'm taking away 1, so 4.2.
4.2.
And I'm taking away 2 million, so I got
2.2, sorry.
2.2. There is my heartburn, guys and ladies, and that is you only have 2.2 left of income coming in, and yet we want to sign a lease payment for 3.2. Am I correct in my figures?
Based on the current assumptions in here, yes, sir. What
All right,
you
so
just
that
walked through, the
means
math
that
works. Yes, sir.
I've got the $1.7 million in increased funding for operation, plus we're gonna have to come up with another million in order to make the payment. Now, the only place I know where that million's coming from is from local tax, ad valorem taxes. Am I correct?
Correct.
Not unless the state's gonna send another $1 million down here. So as you can see, we're looking at around 2.7 million. And if you analyze that based upon a tax rate, immediately, how much are we going to have to increase the tax rate in order to accommodate this? I'm glad, look at this calculator going.
Hey, I messed up once already.
I
I'm not gonna do
appreciate it.
twice. Based on $2.7 million and a 1 penny on your tax rate, we had at about $740,000 this year. Be about 3.6.
So we would actually, if we go with the plan, we would have to have roughly a 3.6 cent increase in taxes to go with the plan. And that's where I've got some heartburn. That's where I got some heartburn. Is there a way for us to accomplish the goal of building the new schools that will not hit us with a tax increase? That's the questions coming to me from my constituents. They want the schools. Hey, one of them's in my district, and I realize I'm getting some pushback because people would rather me just say, go with the plan and not even ask the questions. But I'm just not that type of guy. I have to look at both sides of it. Some people say you're going to increase my taxes in order to build these schools. Well, what about the other schools that are coming down the pipeline? How much more are my taxes going to go up? So these are the serious questions that we as board members are going to have to answer. Now, let me put it into your numbers here, if I can. If I'm correct, you are showing a deficit in column N on the second year of $723,000.
Yes, sir.
Based upon a payment on debt service of how much?
2.6.
2.6. So if I increase that by $600,000 to bring it up to 3.2 million that we'd be making in payments, I would add $600,000 to the 723.
Yes, sir.
I'm just doing a cross-check, is all I'm doing.
Absolutely.
Based upon your figures as such, it does bring it up to that, we're gonna be short.
And just to clarify, again, you're under this analysis that we've looked at, you're short. You're still short. You're short the year that you issue the debt, $723,000 that you mentioned. But we do have leftover reserves that weren't used up front. So we're using those reserves in column P over time.
Agreed, but if I change the analysis from the 2.6 million payment to 3.2, I'm immediately on the first year going to increase my shortage by $600,000.
And the 3.2, are you talking about the school board's
Yes.
projects? The one thing that you might not be including, and I didn't hear it in the conversation, is the operating cost may also be less.
Well, that's true.
Just a-
I'm assuming the operating cost is going to be less by, what did I figure over here, about $340,000. I agree. But just on the payments itself, we're going to be short about $1.2 million. We're going to be short. Am I correct?
Yes, sir, based on what you just walked through.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. King.
on the thought of the $4 million reserve, or the restricted part, I was hoping that the $4 million would be included in all the projections and not be restricted, so it would be part of the analysis to begin with. And we use all of the funds available to possibly reduce the possibility of a tax increase.
Yes,
as we
sir.
move forward. That was the questioning before Mr. Daugherty brought that to light, is that if we can use all of the money going in, it not be so possibly restrictive, that maybe we could drop that.
Based on this analysis here, the $30 million of schools, we've kept that minimum of $4 million. But if you were to be able to tap into that, if you used $1.3 million of that, you could avoid that tax equivalent on the capital side. Those funds are reserved for school capital and debt service. So on the operating side, you can't tap into that $4 million to use for operations, but you can tap into it for the school debt service and capital, which approximately $1.3 million would eliminate that tax equivalent.
Mr. Mark.
So in that scenario that you shared there, given because that 1.2, I think Mr. Tarr was talking about, that's in the first year? It's not a recurring 1.3, second year, third year, fourth year, it's in the first year. Is that correct?
Every year.
There would be some recurrence. If y'all would like to see a case with different assumptions, we're happy to run that. We just need the assumptions that y'all want to see. And I'd feel better
I
having it on
understand that,
paper
we
in
don't
front
want
of
to
you.
put you on the spot, because each time you get a different set of figures, it forces you to try to see if you can analyze it to justify or to enlighten whatever the need is at that moment. I couldn't help when you were talking about the possible tax increase, and it caused for me to have a better memory than I probably have. But if this county was to fund everything that you all had on a printout some months ago, help me now if I'm wrong, but didn't that figure come up to having increased the tax rate by about 16 cents or something in that range? I say that because to get done what this county needs to get done, I think the citizens just gonna have to realize that the money will have to come from someplace. And we can talk for the next year on if the lottery funds don't come and if the sales tax doesn't get here and if the sky's falling. But at some point, we're gonna have to fund some of it now and some of it later. That's just how I see this, and we got to arrive at some place where we can begin to fund some of it, because if we intend to do those things, it's on a larger projection that I saw like last fall. It's not gonna just take these pennies that you're talking about, it's gonna take some more pennies to get all that done, and there's a public waiting out there to hear what we're gonna do about that. I agree with Mr. Daughter, we can't spend everything now, but there's some things we have to move on with. And we just can't assume that Raleigh's gonna dry up and the sales tax coming into the county's gonna dry up. We can't assume that, otherwise we would just do nothing.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Darty had his hand up first, Mr. King.
I just want to clarify. I remember a nice young gentleman asking me, Mr. Daughter, what in the world, why are you opposed to the lease when we have, the school board has the monies available? And that's a pressing question. If those dollars are available, why would I object to that? And that's why I just want to make sure we are recognizing that the dollars are not available. We are $1.2 million short this year, next year, the following year, because that lease payment is a level payment. So it's not a matter that we're only going to be looking at 1 year of a deficit. We're going to be looking at a deficit going out many years, because your analysis is based upon a payment of 1.6 million to start off with. Now, it does decrease through the years, but when you put a level payment in there of $3.2 million, it's going to dramatically change the amount of dollars that we're going to have to raise property taxes in order to pay for it. And yes, we're going to need that. We're going to need a comparison of a 3.2 because the communities feel like that it's affordable, the monies are available, and we need to have an analysis so we know exactly how big of a hole are we digging. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Mayor. We'll get to you, Mr. King.
Thank you.
The question I have is that I like to see is that the Board of Education presentation from the company the other day, am I correct, was that 40 million for 2 schools? Is that correct? That they presented? The cost of the schools? What was it?
The amount financed.
That's
What is the amount financed?
Okay.
I'm sorry, that was roughly the amount financed. If we were to be able to close in April and get the lower interest rate, that was the amount financed.
Okay. Now, going further, is that what I question I have is that if you take the presentation we heard from the Board of Education, use your figures and not 15 million per school, but use 20 million per school, I would like to see an analysis and a comparison based on the same cost for schools, but I'd like to see where we would be if we built a traditional school, and then beside of that, a high performance with a lease. And I'd like to see that comparison. That way we are talking apples to apples. And we should be able to do that. I would like, I have some questions that I would like for Davenport to address to this commission board, and that's one of them. We haven't done that. We haven't done that. And the key is, the second question is, in my mind as a commissioner, and don't forget now, I'm for schools. I want to build these schools. But I'd like to see that comparison, but I would also like to know, if Davenport, what is your experience with, or if any, with schools built on a lease purchase? And we certainly have hired you to probably answer these questions at some point if we ask that.
You ask a question, I want to hear his answer.
Just for clarity, lease purchases are done routinely for schools, installment purchase contracts. They're done all over the state, have been since the 1990 Wayne County case related to your courthouse. But this is not a lease purchase, this is an operating lease. This is a different arrangement altogether. There, in the terms of the lease, you're not acquiring capital value, even though it will turn over at the end of the lease. But it's not one that you automatically get title. So it's a totally different transaction than a lease purchase. This operating lease.
We have participated in one other lease financing like the one described here. It did have a few different components that this financing doesn't have. It involved new market tax credits and a qualified school construction bond, which is a different type of bond issue than we would be talking about here. But we have participated in one of those and down in Hope County. Going back for a second, sir, you mentioned a couple things up front that you would like to see a comparison of a traditional school versus a high-performance school. I guess maybe now's not the time, but if you could just sort of give us the assumptions you'd like to see there, what sort of project costs you want to see compared to what sort of project cost to project cost, what you'd like to see, and we can do that.
Well, reply. The figures on the leasing of the school is, and I've been in private business. I lease equipment all the time for my business and have, but I quit doing it for the simple reason that I have some questions here. And I've expressed these at the Board of Education meeting Friday, is that I see a school under the lease agreement that is only 4 years old, and we are being told that we're not going to have any power bills or anything of that nature, which may be true. But I asked the question directly. What history do we have? What's going to happen after 20 years? What can we say after 20 years? And the quote was this: we should not have a power bill. Not we will not have a power bill, we should not. And that is where I, as facilities chairman of the facilities committee here in Wayne County, that's where I have some questions, is that where is the history on this particular type of lease? And so That's the only question I have, is that the history is not there. I want to build these schools. I think the schools themselves, the construction is fantastic. But I do have some problems with the fact of the leasing and what's gonna happen in the future. Now, yeah, we don't have a crystal ball. We need to probably, look at the possibilities of lottery funds, may not be there. But the other thing is that you have to look at the worst case as well as hopefully the best case. And that's what we do as commissioners. So those are the only issues that I have as far as the longevity and what's gonna happen. Or are we gonna spend more for school maintenance after 20 years and lose all the credits that we have gotten the first 20 years by not having a power bill? No one can answer that. It's not, it doesn't have a history. So that's the only question I have. I want to build a school.
Mr. King.
Thank you for your presentation.
Yes, sir.
For what I've gleaned from all you've said, it reminds me of 14 months ago, the board, set its priorities to set a course to improve education. And you guys have worked diligently with this board for the last 14 months. I know further than that past, but especially since we've put education as a priority with this board, and to create jobs and to cut the tax rate and to reduce unnecessary spending was a very big priority. And I want to applaud this commission for cutting $1,860,000 from the budget last year. And we have already come out of the gate wanting to cut another million this year in spending and unnecessary spending that could affect the programs that this county has. Some of the programs. And that goes back to what Mr. Daugherty was saying, Commissioner Daugherty, about the $1.2 million or the $1 million being short. We can find that, Mr. Daugherty, in this budget this year. I'm certain of that, being a commissioner since '08 and understanding the spending habits since '08. I'm confident that we can cut another $1 million this coming year in our budget. I'm very confident in that. Now, in what another commissioner had mentioned is what we can look at for the future. And that being said, we are going to have to sacrifice. There are a lot of uncertainties in this package. You've done a great job, and I appreciate all the work that you do. But it's sacrificing to get what we want. 8 months ago, after working long hours and securing our budget, as you know, we did just that. We worked a lot of hours, as someone said in a local paper, is that, I don't know, we spent, 800 hours or something. It was unbelievable. But my journal says we spent longer than that, or I did. But this month, after, waiting in years past, this board again proves that investing the $12.6 million in school renovations that you brought out, and you've put down here, considering building 2 brand-new schools this month. In fact, that we're enhancing the most precious and valuable asset, children. And I really appreciate all this today. But, Mr. Chairman, the future right now in advanced education and what I've heard, performance schools, I've always thought performance was the kids' grades average when they come out of school. The teachers, I know green schools are green schools, but when I think of performance, I think of kids. I think of the children, the teachers, and the hard hours, long hours that they put in their schedule to get these kids to perform better by taking these tests. But today, this advanced education and this quality of life today in these 2 communities, Spring Creek and Grantham, are really held in our balance, in the hands of us. It's really held in the balance of this board. Therefore, Mr. Chairman, today I move that we support and approve the school board's recommendation to build the Grantham Middle School and Spring Creek Middle School in compliance with DPI, including STEM, but adjust the funding arm by using the design-build method with Davenport's oversight to comply with LGC recommendations. That's my motion.
Have a motion on the floor. Any discussion? Mr. Bell.
Mr.
Chairman, now I think we're getting a little overboard when we start to tell the school what group they're gonna get to do it, and that's not our role. Our role is to fund the schools, and it's not to dictate to them as to who they're gonna get to build the schools. Now, I think that we ought to adjust that a little bit and decide whether or not we're gonna fund whatever they're asking us for. And let's don't get into the, which construction contract is gonna build the schools. Now, I know I'm just one individual, but that's my opinion. I just think that and if you listen to me back a couple of weeks ago, when we asked Davenport to bring these figures, and I asked you then that we should consult with the schools to get their figures so they would have a comparison to make, rather than coming up with our figures, and then they have a set of figures. Now we gotta go back and do it all over again. So we need to pay attention as to what our roles are. Mr. Chairman.
Any other comments?
You know I always have a comment.
Before you start,
Okay.
Marcia, you keep up with all this now, because I
I
see
did
where we're
not
going.
get all that, I'll be quite honest.
What, the motion? I move we support and approve the school board's recommendation to build the Grantham Middle School and the Spring Creek Middle School in compliance with DPI, including STEM, but just the funding arm by using the design-build method with Davenport's oversight to comply with LGC recommendations.
Mr. Chairman, I would like to
Wait a minute.
amend that motion.
I already.
Can I make my comments before you make your amendment? Again, I think everybody sitting on the school board, everybody sitting up here on this board of commissioners recognizes that we want to build these two schools. So let's say that right up front. Everybody wants to get it done. But the tough thing, it's about like talking to your children sometimes. You got to live within your budget. You got to sit down with your budget at home, and you've got to make some decisions that are tough. But you cannot overspend what you can afford. And I say that to say that it's not only this need, it's future needs. So you have to look at not only what you need today, but you got to look at what you're going to need tomorrow. And this decision, the decision that we made here 2 weeks ago, and we moved forward with 3 items off the capital improvement plan, was a great stride. Now come before us, I wasn't thinking that quickly, but we are faced with a decision on these 2 schools. We understand the advantages of solar and geothermal and so forth, but you'll have to admit there are some questions in regards to the viability. And what I mean by that is you can talk to one person and they're saying that it's worth the investment, and you talk to someone else and they say, well, it really isn't worth the investment. The payback on a geothermal, I heard just yesterday from a prominent architect that stated that it was a 20-year payback on geothermal. That same architect turned around and says, Joe, are you aware that DPI requires all new construction now of schools to have a 30% savings on utilities? So right off the bat, the new type of construction immediately is going to deliver to us, unconventional construction, is going to deliver us a 30% savings. Now, we can tweak that. We can tweak that. I do not know of any way to accomplish the goal in the short term of getting these 2 schools built as quickly as possible, but short of 2 decisions. One is agree with a plan that's going to put us in a deficit of $1.2 million plus the operation of 1.7. Guys, that's $2.9 million. We're approaching $3 million on an annualized basis that we're going down. Or in the other alternative, to look at some way of constructing it that will save dollars. And every information given to me by architects, design builders, and so forth are telling me that you would save money if you go design build. And so therefore, I am going to support the motion. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Chair.
Mr. Mayor.
I'd like to ask Davenport this question. As far as design build, we have heard information that design build is not good for schools and so forth and so on, but yet I see as facilities chairman here in Wayne County that on the Still Memorial Library is a good example down in Mount Olive. By going to design build, we saved $1 million, basically off of the actual construction cost. I would like to hear from you as to design build. How prevalent is it in building new schools?
We do finance, not architectural things. We do see some design build. I think it's a concept that's been pushed for a while, and you hear it both, as you say, you hear people talk both ways. But I think that's really a question for your architect more than us. My answer is more or less hearsay than what I hear around.
Design build for schools in North Carolina has not been done. The statute that would allow for it was just passed in the last session. There's not even a test case on the book, so nobody's done it for a school in North Carolina.
Please state your name and who.
I'm sorry, I'm Robert Ferris. I'm the CEO of SFLA Architects. And the statute, House Bill 857, that allows for design build was just passed in the last session. Let me clarify that I know of in the state, and there's only been 2 schools bid in the state since this last summer that I know of. It's never been done for a school in North Carolina.
Well, follow-up question. Do you have an opinion about design build?
Yes, I do. Design build, and as I said the other day, my company also does design build. We have a design build group. Design build is a good delivery method for certain building types, warehouses, industrial buildings, things like that. For schools, I would say it's not a very good delivery system. As I've told you, my company also, in our role as developers, we have done some design build projects for building types that were very repetitive, like student housing. Design build is very complex if you do it right. Someone's got to write an RFQ or an RFP. That process is an enormous effort. As I told you the other day, we did that as a developer once, and it took a team of about 10 designers 3 months to write an appropriate RFQ or RFP that could be responded to by design builders. The only reason we did that was because we had a client that wanted multiple proposals, okay? At the end of the day, design build itself does not create value. And that's what we're talking about. How do you create something? How do you create something that would not otherwise exist? That's my definition of value. And I could do these projects could be leased, and we could do design build. I mean, we have the legal authority to now do that. So we could lease the school to the school system and do design build. I've chosen, if we move forward, not to do design build because I don't think it would create value. As the developer, I would do the most economical thing I can do. And being a design builder, an architect, and a developer, I have all of those tools at my disposal. So if you want it design build, I can do it design build, but it won't create value. What creates value is eliminating the power bill, and there was so much said here today that needs to be clarified. I know that I probably won't be able to do that all, but Mr. Daughtry made a comment about the payback on these high-performance systems. We have to remember that of the increased cost that we're proposing, net, only $3.5 million of that cost for 2 schools is solar panels, geothermal systems, and all of that. And we're eliminating a power bill that starts out at about $300,000 a year, and depending on what inflation rate you use, probably ends up around $1 million a year. And Mr. Daughtry, I complimented you for pointing out that if you have 30 schools, That means we're going to be spending $15 million a year on utilities in the future. And that's what this is truly about. That's the value proposition we bring to the table here. And it isn't about design build. Design build generally produces, you can do cheap buildings, design build. You can also do them traditional delivery. We can lease you a cheap building. You know, so less expensive buildings are accomplishable under any delivery method. As far as the school system's ability to pay, we haven't heard from Ms. Barwick yet, but I saw a spreadsheet a few months ago that the numbers were similar, I think, to Davenport's numbers, but clearly there was an ability to pay, so maybe there's a miscommunication there. Someone said earlier, you know, why don't we bring the school board into this conversation? I think that would be wise. I think the other comment about operating costs, you really have to drill down when you talk about school operating costs, because so many of those are state-funded positions. State-funded, there aren't very many locally funded positions in the school world. So they do spend the money, but they get reimbursed from the state. For instance, the principal's salary, you know, the state, that's an expense of the school board, but the state pays that. So you have to be very careful when you're talking about operating costs for schools. You have to look at what percentage of them are locally funded. So I think that that conversation needs to be had. My dilemma is, you know, it sounds like to me, from the comments I've heard, there's some interest in sort of putting this off and analyzing it a little further. Our backs are up against a wall with an interest rate issue. We can get a lower interest rate if we close in April that will be equivalent to the cost of the auditoriums. So we can either move forward now and get the auditoriums, or we can wait and almost assuredly lose the auditoriums. So, I apologize for the commissioners being in that position. You know, I met with the commissioners, I met with staff in early November about this, with county staff, and we were trying to get on the agenda, and I know y'all been dealing with lots of issues, but, you know, now's our moment. If we want these auditoriums, we can either pay the bank the interest or we can pay for the auditoriums, and that's unfortunately where we're at.
Mr. Chairman, I don't mean to interrupt, but on auditoriums, that was part of my motion. I said the Grantham Middle School and Spring Creek Middle School in compliance with DPI, including STEM. I automatically assumed auditoriums were included in the plans of supporting and approving the school board's recommendation, because that's what I heard Friday at my meeting at 3 o'clock, is that the consensus of the board, school board, wanted 2 auditoriums, one in Grantham and one in Spring Creek. So I just want to clarify that in my motion, that included auditoriums. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir. And you know, if you were to do design build, I promise you, you will not start construction this summer. There is no way you can do that. It'll be 8 to 9 months minimum. And to assume that interest rates are not going to go up and construction costs are not going to go up in 8 to 9 months is a very risky assumption that I would not want to have my name attached to. So I think you really have to think hard about that assumption. That was a huge assumption in the analysis that Davenport was asked to do.
And just a minute.
Before you leave,
Okay, go ahead, Mr. Pate.
I don't think anybody's interested in building a cheap version. I think the actual plan that you have or what you want to put on these schools is probably a good thing. But my question is this, and Mr. Dollars brought it up, the numbers that I saw on Friday had it been paid for across the board, and now we're looking at, what was it, $1.2 million short? I'd like someone to speak to that. Okay,
Ms. Barber.
please do that.
Nan Barwick, Wayne County Schools. When we started looking at this project 9-10 months ago, my approach was to look at the total picture, the total 20 years we were going to look to finance this program. So I looked not just year by year like Mr. Daughtry has looked, but I looked for the whole 20-year period and what I was anticipating in revenue on my half-cent sales tax. I was still counting on that lottery and our fund balance in the capital account now. And my projection, of course, depending on the many numbers that have been thrown at me in the last several months, is that we can fund these 2 schools. This is what I did, though. I did eliminate that $4 million that the board wants to keep as a threshold. I took that off the books myself, because we're going to need it. I also looked at the fact that in 13 years, my Q-Scab is paid for, and I'm hoping to use that lottery money, God willing, if it's still there, to be available, and that's another $7.5 to $8 million. I've taken all of that, I've looked at the whole 20 years, not just year by year. That was my approach to the numbers. So yes, if you go year by year, that's a bad picture. You've got to look at the fund balance that's sitting there now. You've got to hope you're going to have that lottery money moving forward, and we eliminated that $4 million threshold to keep in the capital account. That's how I arrived at my numbers.
Any other questions from?
One follow-up.
Okay.
Now, you're saying you need to make that decision in, by April to get to their board meeting, is that correct?
We need to go to the LGC meeting in April, so we would need a
Okay,
decision.
so what is your window with us before we get there?
We need to have a preliminary meeting with the LGC next week. And Davenport is really good at this, and they do a lot of meetings at the LGC, so if this board made a decision this week, we could I'm assuming they could schedule a meeting next week. That's probably a big ask, but that could probably happen if the LGC knew that we were trying to close in April. And they can speak better about that than I am, and that's the commissioners. They would schedule that on your behalf. They would schedule the LGC meeting or maybe work with your finance officer to work that out. But we need to close in April if we want that lower interest rate.
And let me ask Davenport a question then. If we did not make that decision today, and say it was 2 weeks out, would that still be impossible to schedule that meeting?
2 weeks out, it would be possible to schedule a meeting, but, I mean, you speak to this better than I can, but in terms of getting, if your goal is to achieve LGC approval at the April meeting, I mean, if you don't make a decision on what you want to do or move forward for another 2 weeks, that might be difficult.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it would be because you're talking about a different type of financing, but I think the commission would work with you as much as they could. Generally, an application has to be in a month in advance of the approval meeting. Their meeting's on the first Tuesday of each month. So if you're talking about April, what were you looking for?
It's April 1.
For an LGC approval.
So it is possible.
So could be done. It'll be pushing, and the LGC to have to work with us.
Yeah, I would say it's not impossible, but even if we started today, there would be some difficulties in achieving that approval on April 1st, just given the fact that it is a different transaction that is not the normal transaction.
Mr. Bell?
I'm going to put a motion on the floor if Mr. King, if he withdraw his design bill, then I will go with the straight up.
I will not withdraw my motion, Mr. Bell.
Okay, then I will put my motion on the floor that we do not use design bill as stated by the architect and other people that's in the building business. That we just go with a straight approval of the school board's request.
You get that, Marshall?
Amendment to the
Got
motion.
to be an amendment to.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying, that's what I mean.
All right. Got an amendment on the floor and Mr. Bell's amendment also. I saw several other hands up.
Well,
Mr. Daugherty.
uh,
Or Mr. Camardi.
If I hear us right, we want to build the schools. We're down to which one of these methods, design, build, and the method, the lease agreement, and the method you're going to use. Ms. Borwick has given an overview as to how she perceived it being paid for. But if we're going to, and I hear the two motions, and I believe I understand the motion and the amendment, but if we're going to delay for reasons to determine if there's a design bill, and the gentleman right here said they could do any kind you wanted, but if they can move forward now, they can save the interest. First thing we need to look at is trying to save the interest by not delaying. And I thought Mr. King said that if we follow SDPI and LGC rules, we would move on. And I thought I was ready to vote with him to move on because but I was just asked not to get hung up on design, build, or the other method. So maybe is there some place we can meet in the middle on the motion so that we can move on? I'm just curious.
Mr. Chairman, I will not withdraw the motion.
Mr. Dunn.
Reading this while we get paid the big bucks.
Speak for yourself.
Two issues here, and Ms. Bart, could I ask you to come to the podium because I got some questions. I understand what you're saying, that you computed it based upon the entire 20-year term. But did you factor in there the $1.7 million in additional cost of operation?
This was strictly capital.
I understand. And unfortunately, we've got to look at not only that, but also the operation. Because it is all-inclusive. If we build the schools, then we've got additional cost of operation. But yet, at the same time, I heard a comment in regards to the state is supposed to operate the schools, and they pay for operation. So my question is, do we have dollars in the 1.7? We already know the electric bill would come out if we went with the lease. So we know if we go with that type of high-performance construction, that would go away. My question is, are there other figures here? Because we're going to have to make a decision, and it's based upon the estimate of the $1.7 million. Can that go away? If the $1.7 million would go away and you all would fund or have the state fund the operation of these schools, then we wouldn't have that into the equation.
When I looked at the operating cost, I took in consideration that the state funds your principals. Those are given.
Okay.
My teachers, for the most part, should move from one school to the other because
Right.
I've already got those schools operating with teachers now. So for the most part, your teachers are going to follow the children.
Right.
I took that in consideration. What the state doesn't currently fund, it's all based on ADM, and that's student population, by the way. That total student population does not change. So the current funding formula for my custodians, my clerical people, depending on how you split your social workers, guidance counselors, and those type things, the formula does not increase because I have opened 2 new schools. It's not school-specific. It's ADM. So that's why I have presented to you worst-case scenario on your personnel cost. I'm not saying we can't afford some of that, but I can't tell you today with full 100% confidence that we can handle that whole total amount.
Can I get a little clarification on that? Because, and I understand you're trying to keep it a little bit ambiguous, but I'm trying to narrow it down
I'm
as
trying to keep
such.
you from cornering me on something I can't support.
I am. I'm trying to nail you down here on, and that is, are there cuts elsewhere in the budget based upon the monies coming from the state to offset this cost?
Can I look at it?
Just a question. I mean, we're asked to make a decision now. So I'm just asking.
I can't say that we can cut personnel from another school to put personnel in these 2 schools.
I was just saying, in your overall budget, is there places that you can cut in order to accommodate the estimated $800 and some odd thousand increase?
I can't guarantee that.
You cannot.
No, sir. No. There is some income from the sale of if we go with the solar method, there is revenue from that we could consider to use. But that was what, Robbie? How much was that again?
It goes up over time. It was a total of about $5 million.
But I understand during the first 5 years, that is going to your company.
To them.
Is that
Yes,
correct?
Well, what that's doing is going to eliminate the maintenance costs. What that money would do the first 5 years is just eliminate the maintenance cost on the building, or the maintenance on the HVAC and the solar panel.
Well, I agree, but the school system's not going to get any revenue from that.
Yeah, but they won't have an expense to maintain.
Y'all about like eels, I can't get a hold of you. There's no revenue coming into the school system. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Anyone else?
I was just gonna add to that, that could substantially drop your operating costs from the 850 at worst case. Not only you, because depending on what your maintenance is gonna be, and that's hard to say, I'm talking, clarifying in my mind, I'm sorry. Wait.
Did you want to add something to what he, please, because we want
I
all
was just going to want to say it
information.
does. I think that was the point of Mr. Pridgen's comment. It does substantially reduce your operating costs.
So 850 may not be the 680 or something like that, maybe you take out the electricity, electrical part. Of course,
Yeah.
I don't know what your maintenance costs are on the schools, on average.
If you take out the electrical sales, that's one piece, and then the generation, so there's two components. One is you don't have a power bill, but then you're making money too. So that's actually two different pots of money that would reduce your operating costs.
So the
Net effect.
first 5 years, there was no electrical, and then there would be basically no cost of maintenance.
No cost of maintenance on the mechanical systems and the HVAC systems and the solar panels. And then,
Okay.
over time, that amount money would grow.
So if that's money that the school system is saving, that is actually money that's money coming to. If you save it, I mean, you're not spending this, you have it, you're saving it. So the answer to that is technically yes, Mr.
That's
Doctor.
right.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. King?
I'd like to call for question on the amendment, please.
We will, Mr. King, but I want to make sure everyone has asked the questions before we vote.
I understand.
That needs to be asked. Is there anyone else on the board have any more questions or comments?
Can I abstain?
So we're voting on what?
All right, Marcia, if you would,
To remove
read Mr. Bell's amendment, please.
To utilize the method that the Board of Education requested and do not use the design-build method of construction.
Is everyone clear on Mr. Bell's amendment? Any questions?
Yes, I have one.
Mr. Mayor?
I want to be clear, whether you use the design build or not does not have any effect on the school that you're going to build, the high-performance school. You can still do it under design build. We're going to have a substandard school is what I'm saying.
Okay, so if you agree to lease the school, and you would like us to do it design-build, we can also do that. It would not add anything, but it won't take anything away. It's probably more than anything, a lot of reporting to the state of North Carolina. Under the new statute, there's a lot of reporting that has to be done. So we have, if you agree to lease the building from us, but your requirement was to do design-build, we could do that, but again, I would say to you, it will not add anything. It will make, there is some paperwork that has to be filled out annually if you do that. I would strongly suggest you not do that. But
Okay.
I can deliver you the same exact building under either delivery method. All I would be doing is signing a design-build contract with my contractor as opposed to a CM at risk contract. If that's your question, I'm not really sure the question, but
Follow up, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Mayor?
Okay, and you're saying if it won't add or take away from the total, what are you basing that on? Because I understand that design build hasn't been done.
It hasn't been.
So what are you basing your assumption that there would be no benefit either way?
well, my company did about $40 million worth of design-build at Fort Bragg and other military bases last year. And I can compare, I have that comparative data. I can compare that to what we've done under our leasing model through the CM at risk delivery. You got to remember, leasing, you've got leasing and traditional delivery. Under the leasing model, I can do design build, CM at risk, or traditional delivery. You do design-build, all you're doing is a construction procurement method. It's like comparing apples and oranges. There truly is not a real comparison here, because under leasing, you can use any construction delivery method that you'd like to use. I could do low bid, I could do CM at risk, I could do design-build. I can do any construction procurement method. What I'm telling you is that design-build in any way, shape, or form, however you get there, does not create value. And I have a lot of experience to back that up. Now, you know, the Board of Education has asked me to do this the most efficient and effective way I know how to do it. And that's kind of what I'll do. Unless somebody tells me to do it differently, I'll do it the most efficient way I know how to do it.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. King.
Appreciate the comments. Back to discussion on the amendment, is that I understand from Davenport, this is a specific lease that's unlike what we're used to. Is that correct? And the lease issue has been brought up and talked about extensively in the amendment. I think the amendment is asking to move with the school board's recommendation for the lease, but not go design build, but use this other method. Now, I'm opposed to a lease. If you can't buy a car and pay payments, you can lease one. If your lease doesn't work out, you can go to a 60-month payout instead of a 36-month payout. Anything to do to sell a car. It's the same thing here. I feel like I'm at the state fair buying knives for my wife 35 years ago, and the knives worked for about a week. The design build does work. If it didn't work, the General Assembly wouldn't have put it together in the manner that it's put together. DOT wouldn't use it, and it's spending multi-millions of dollars to save millions for the taxpayer. You wouldn't have the design build in your venue, in your licensed architect, contractor, your design build method. You're going to have it in case somebody wants it, just like right now. It looks like we want it. So you've already said it, you can do it, but you said Friday in the meeting that you didn't like design build, but you were in the design build business because that is part of the system. You also just said that the design build is something that's new. Well, you've only got one school in North Carolina that you can hang a hat on, and that's 7 months ago. Show me all the schools that are lined up. You said the other day DPI only has 2 applications. Where are all the people lined up? I've got articles that the lottery funds are in jeopardy that show that the school systems are watching these funding arms. Now, with all of that said, the best way for this county to move forward is, number one, in education, is to trust the school board. That's the first thing, Mr. Chairman and fellow commissioners. Is that, you didn't say that. No, I'm saying it. I'm telling the people right now is that the best way that we can move forward in education is to trust the school board. But I want them to trust us. It goes both ways. Because we've asked some great questions, just like you have presented your case to the school board Friday, that you presented to the facilities committee 3 months ago. And I appreciate you going to the school board and presenting that openly. But the school board's got to trust us in funding. When we took over this past year, Mr. Chairman, this board, the majority of this board lit out in January, and we said our priority was education and cutting taxes and cutting spending. We cut 4 cents off the tax rate. We went from 70.25 to 66.6. Is that correct? 6.65. 4 cents. We had the highest tax reduction of any county, percentage-wise, in this state, out of 100. And we went on record in January, or in the budget, in June, when we approved the budget, that we reduced that rate so we can afford education. That is on record. That's what this commission board said. So it's down to 66 because we could have gone 67 and put $780,000 in the kitty to spend. And it was recommended that we do that, but we did not. We went down another cent. So we've got really the citizens have to look at sacrificing programs, doing all we can to build these 2 new schools. In the way that Davenport, who we have used for years, has explained it to us today, I'm sold on Davenport's presentation off of all that they have done for the past 15 years, but for the past, since '08, since I've really looked at it. But my motion still stands, Mr. Chairman, and before we vote on the amendment, I just wanted to make that comment. Thank you.
One quick comment,
Mr. Doherty.
trying to compare apples to apples. Davenport has come here and basically said that the county can borrow money a little less than 4%. In fact, the bondholders are so eager to buy those bonds, they're going to pay a premium to buy them. Am I correct?
The bondholders are going to pay a premium to buy bonds of this nature in this market.
In this market?
In this market, and that's, regardless of who
Markets could change, no doubt.
regardless of who the issuer is, the general consensus is the market wants a premium bond. That's what they're looking for, and that's what we've got here.
Well,
So it's,
Well, I've heard that we need to lock in their interest rate under the lease. Under the lease program, their estimated interest rate was a little over 5. We currently can borrow money less than 4. 1% in interest over 20 years is a huge amount of money. Would you agree with that?
Yes, that is a savings. On a lease, and again, not a capital lease, just a lease, you're paying a taxable rate on this financing because the county, under tax law, is not acquiring value.
Correct.
It's a lease, operating lease.
And my understanding, also
No.
under the design build, would we not be able to avail ourselves of the savings on the sales tax? It could be
Now-
structured in such
Now,
a way.
design bill, we're talking about the lease versus, is that what you're talking about?
Well, it's a lease
design?
versus design build, basically. The amendment is to go with the lease, and the motion is to go with design build. So we're comparing, we're making a decision based upon the 2 of those. Under a design build, would we not have the availability of saving sales tax?
That's my understanding. And I do not know on the other. I have no idea.
yeah, that's,
The only way to avoid the sales tax is if the county commissioners actually build the buildings. It doesn't matter whether it's design build or traditional delivery or whatever. If you build and own the buildings, then you can save the sales tax.
Well,
And that is not common, although it can be done.
But we've just done that on 2 improvements in the county. Is that right, Ms. Hope?
Yes.
Yes. So we've already accomplished
Yeah,
that. as
even
such.
with our $30 million plus or minus in savings, we had the sales tax figured in there. We had it figured in.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
so just to clarify, I'm sorry, I want to make sure, you're talking about financing methods and project delivery methods, 2 different things.
Oh, agreed.
Okay. So
Agreed.
there's the financing method of the lease versus a traditional county
I'm
funding
saying
bond.
if the school board and the board of commissioners get together and develop a plan that the school board wants to build as such, and we have an agreement similar to what we had with the 2 improvements that we just did, what'd you call those funds? QSCAB funds, where we, in fact, the county actually contracted through the county to produce it, we have the sales tax savings. We could actually formulate this to be done in such a legal way to get maximum benefits on interest rates as well as sales tax and design bill. And that's why I'm leaning that way.
And those 2 projects were shovel-ready.
Yeah.
That were created by the school board.
Yeah. Mr. Counsel, let me ask this. Now, you could structure that in such a way, could you not?
Certainly. Mr. Edwards and I have done that in the past. In fact, not just the last 2, but some previous renovations were done that way too. And
Well,
the county, depending on the way it's financed, it will depend on how long the county would actually own it. But you've got a situation that it's not like the county coming in and telling the Board of Education how the building's to be done. The Board of Education makes those decisions, and they act as your agent in operating the construction and dealing with the contractors, just in your name.
Yeah, we have no interest in getting involved with it. We let the school board build them, but it's actually done through the county to get the savings.
That's correct.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
And the county in those cases has let the savings that you've gotten from the sales tax go back to the Board of Education for their programs.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Any other discussion? Marshall, just for clarification, read Mr. Bell's amendment one more time.
Okay, just want to save this. The amendment to the motion was to utilize the construction method requested by the Board of Education and do not use the design-build construction method.
Is everyone clear on Mr. Bell's amendment? Any other discussion? Not all in favor of Mr. Bell's motion, show of sign of right hand. All opposed? Motion failed with the vote of 5-2. All right, now Marcia, if you would, please read Mr. Keene's.
To support and
Motion.
approve the Board of Education's recommendations to build Grantham Middle School and Spring Creek Middle School, which includes the auditoriums, in compliance with DPI, including STEM, utilizing the design-build method with Davenport oversight to comply with the Local Government Commission recommendations.
Any more clarification needed? Any more questions?
One question,
Mr. Camardi.
back to the gentleman. With the design-build method that is spoken of, you said you can deliver that and not lose any of the time and the interest and all that.
You will.
Something sound like something's gonna be lost.
You will lose time. There's no way you can be in it by August of 2015 under that method, even though the design is arguably complete. You will lose the interest rate. You will lose the interest rate.
And
you will,
hold it right there. We would also, if you lose the interest rate and all that, we would be sacrificing the gyms. Is that what you said earlier?
I think you would well, it depends on how much you want to spend. I mean, it's going to cost you more than the $3.2 million that the Board of Education has outlined if you went design-build. It will cost more. So you're either going to spend more money or you're going to cut scope, one or the other. So your interest rate's going to be higher, you're not going to meet the schedule, and you're going to lose the tax credits, which the tax credits basically buy down the cost of the high-performance features.
That's what I want. So I've clearly understood that not knocking the design build, we used that one time, but if we go that route, we are changing the time frame. We change the time frame, we're changing the interest possibilities. If we change that, if I understand it, then we're potentially losing the auditoriums that the communities want and some other buildings going out there versus the one that the school board indicated they wanted. That's what I hear.
That's correct, unless you decide to spend a lot more money, which I understand you don't want to do.
I think Mr. King's motion, though, has got the auditoriums all in his motion. My question is, going with the school board's plan and going with design build, I'm going to put you on the spot and probably get tarred and feathered for it. But is there a possibility that if we go with the design build, that it could end up costing us more than what school board's proposal is?
It will absolutely cost you more. There is no question in my mind. you will pay a higher interest rate, you will pay a higher cost, and unless you put solar panels on it, you will have a power bill. There is absolutely no question in my mind you will spend more. I promise you, I guarantee it. If I could put money on it right now, I would. I guarantee you, for the same quality of building, you will spend more money. Now, I have said, you can build cheap buildings. I can build cheap buildings. Anybody can. But for a quality building, I 100% guarantee you'll spend more money. Guaranteed, promised. There's no way around it. Time is your enemy. Time is your enemy. You will spend more money, 100% guaranteed.
Davenport, you wanted to?
Yes, sir. I was just going to follow up with a clarification from before, and Robbie would know more about the architecture stuff. That's not, we don't opine on that. I did want to clarify the financing process, just so everybody knows what we're talking about. Under the lease method, that would be a financing issued by a developer. They would go out and they would issue taxable financing on their own, build the building, and you would owe an operating lease payment to them. That's the one form of financing. The other form of financing, what I'll call a traditional financing, would be county issuing bonds using the money they issue to build the building, to pay a contractor and an architect to build the building. Under a traditional financing, the time frame that you're looking to come to a financing, once a decision is made and a design is complete, we get 60 to 90 days to put a financing in place. The big question is, when can we start that 60 to 90 days? We have to get LGC approval. That's our bellwether. That's when we can really, after we get LGC approval, we can have you the funds within 30 days. In order to get LGC approval under the traditional design bid build, you have to have the building design, you have to have it bid, you have to have all your permits in hand before you can get LGC. Under a design build approach, you got to have all your permits and you've got to have a guaranteed max price contract before you can get LGC approval. Once you get that LGC approval, again, we're about 30 days away from being able to have the funds. The total financing process is 60 to 90 days. I say that just so everybody's clear on what the time frame is. It really depends on the architecture and engineering side of when these projects are ready for us to deliver the financing. In today's market, we calculated the interest rate, all-in interest rate, including cost of issuance, of about 3.94%, call it 4%. That's in today's market. I don't know what that's going to be in 6 months. I don't know what that's going to be in 12 months. I don't know what that's going to be in 18 months. Nobody really does. I can tell you that there's varying opinions on whether interest rates are going to go up or going to go down. Interest rates have been down for a long time. A lot of people think the only thing there is to do is to go up, but people have been saying that for several years. I don't have a crystal ball, and I can't tell you what interest rates are going to do. All I can tell you is the time frame it's going to take you to lock in those interest rates, and the market will determine what the interest rates are when you're ready to price.
And then,
Mr. Camardi.
and in that case, because you can't, that time window is like this, does it factor in your opinion, that the cost, as the gentleman here said, is going to be, if we wait and wait for that process and don't move now, the dollar figure is going to be a larger dollar figure? Or you can't answer that?
Well, I can't
Okay.
speak to the project cost. That's
I got
Robbie.
you. Okay.
On the interest rate side of things, what I can tell you is there's a lot of uncertainty, and the market changes every day. Right now, there's a dearth of supply of bonds. People on the investor side are very eager to buy bonds right now because there's not a whole lot of supply. That could change down the road. You know, what the Fed does, what happens in Europe, all of these things affect the bond markets. I can't tell you what the bond market and interest rates are going to look like. You just have to factor that in your decision process of the time frame.
Right quickly.
I was just going to say, you know, in terms of the financing, under the lease model, we look at two types of financing. One is a public sale, like Davenport has analyzed for you, where there's premium bonds and discounts and all of that. That's one option for us. And the other is a private placement, okay? We actually would propose both. We will price it both ways. We've already priced the public placement. We will do a quick analysis once you approve it, once you approve the project. Before we go to the LGC, we would do an analysis of a public placement and find out whether or not that would be cheaper than a public sale would be cheaper than a private placement. Our current analysis is that a private placement would be cheaper. We actually have a proposal in writing, guaranteed, it's in writing for 4.55%. Okay, taxable, as Bob said. It's a taxable proposal. There's no risk in that. But we have to move to the LGC if we want to eliminate that interest rate risk. That's huge.
Is there discussion?
We'll talk behind your back.
Let's have all of our discussion open, please.
I'm sorry.
Anyone else?
One last little comment.
Mr. Dory.
I appreciate you being here today and giving your opinion on a number of those items. But I do want to point out that there is varying opinion out there from other architects and other contractors that may be different than your analogy. Now, I understand you are speaking specifically to your design, your school, your leasing terms. I understand that. But I want to make sure that everyone understands there are other alternatives, and there are other opinions. And so I appreciate the fact that you would, I think we needed to state that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any other discussion? Marcia, please read that, Mr. King's motion back one more time.
To support and approve the recommendations of the Board of Education to build Grantham Middle School and Spring Creek Middle School, which includes the auditoriums, in compliance with DPI, including STEM, utilizing the design-build method with Davenport oversight to comply with local government commission recommendations.
I have a motion on the floor. All in favor of Mr. King's motion, show sign of right hand. All opposed? Motion carries 4-3.
Thank you, Commissioners.
Yes, ma'am. Recess for
5 minutes anyway.